In tonight's story, betrayal runs deep, but revenge runs deeper. You're listening to Revenge with Jack, where justice always finds its way. The text hit at 3 a.m., that blue-white glow that makes every room feel colder. I'm leaving you and moving to Palm Springs with my 25-year-old babe. I'm taking all our money. It sat there on my screen while the rig throbbed around me, steel ribs humming, seawater slapping the pontoons like an old clock reminding you you're late. My name is Cole Bennett, 52, 27 years offshore. The kind of work that scours you down to function, pressure, torque, safety, repeat. My hands were still slick with grease when the second message slid in. A screenshot of our joint balance showing 2 cents where $142,000 should have been, sealed with a kiss emoji like a joke told over someone's grave. I didn't throw the phone. Didn't pound a bulkhead. I typed, sure. Good luck. The way you might close a valve and wait for the line to settle. Then I powered down, peeled off coveralls, and stood under the shower until the water turned from heat to sting. Salt. Soap. A breath held long enough to hear only my heart. Morning. I skipped eggs and coffee and walked straight to the deck. Rafe Collins, my second, caught the change and didn't say a word. He watched my hands on the safety checklist, how I double-touched every latch, called every reading like we had never done this before. 16 workers lived on whatever we did not miss. Personal sorrow is a luxury we don't load onto the Hello. At lunch, I opened my laptop. Lena, my wife of 18 years, had already filed abandonment. The paperwork said, like the ocean had seduced me away from my own name. A lawyer with a polished smile, Bradley back in Texas, wanted spousal support off excessive income. The email added that her emotional support partner was now living in our house in Odessa. I closed the lid and went back to torque specs. The sea was up a foot, wind 10 knots out of the northwest, small things a man can measure. Night came thin and loud, generators humming like a throat clearing before bad news. I wrote one email, not to Lena, but to my cousin, Evan Morales in Houston. Time to activate Protocol Winter was all I sent. Old code between us from years back, born the day a friend lost everything in a clean courtroom. 3 minutes later, already on it. Do not respond to anything until you're stateside. 2 weeks left on rotation. 12-hour shifts in 110 degrees heat. I could have asked for emergency leave. Men would have understood. But leaving wouldn't fix a thing. Finish the job. Draw the paycheck. Keep the line tight. Before lights out, Vince Soto, our supervisor, stopped in my doorway. Everything stable. Not just the well. Under control, I said. It was true in one way, and soon it would be true in another. The ocean doesn't care, but it teaches. Pressure meets structure. You either hold, or you redesign. I met Lena in a tackle shop that smelled like cedar oil and rubber worms. Odessa heat pressed the windows. She teased a city couple for buying the fanciest lures, then sold them the cheapest hooks with a smile that said she understood people better than fish. I was 33, between contracts, helping a buddy unpack reels. She was 31, quick with change and quicker with jokes. 11 months later, we stood under a courthouse fan, 2 signatures, and a promise. We called it a plan more than a romance. I already had the house, a roof paid off by a lucky stake in a small producer that got swallowed by a bigger mouth. Offshore work gave me a rhythm. 2 months on, 1 month off. That felt like a tide. We told ourselves the math would take care of the rest. Money came like weather fronts in those years. Offshore pays danger wages. A father on the rig once told me, we trade birthdays for braces. It sounded cruel and true. We told ourselves it was temporary. Build a cushion, get out by 50. She would keep the lamp burning. I would come home with the kind of tired that looks like devotion if you squint. The cracks didn't announce themselves. They whispered. Missed dinners first, then missed Decembers. Her friends had husbands at the table on Tuesdays. I had a satellite delay and a bad connection. She sent pictures of new curtains, new paint. I said it looked beautiful because it did. Somewhere around year 12, she stopped asking me when I'd be back. I told myself it was comfort, not distance. There is a quiet shame in long absence. You get good at pretending the phone is enough. I started narrating my days to her like a radio show, pressure logs, weather notes, the gull with 1 foot that landed on the helideck every dawn. She listened less. I mistook quiet for peace. Last Christmas, I came home to a house that had shed its skin. New furniture, The old coffee table gone. The photos rearranged so my face sat farther from hers. She said, I needed a change. The words fell like rain on a tin roof. Loud, then gone. I nodded, put my bag down, made us tea. In the driveway, a black Audi I didn't recognize sat angled like it had a reserved seat. Clients, she said. I didn't ask whose client. 2 months before the text, I noticed transfers I couldn't place. Foundation repair, she said. I drove past the house on my way to the airport. No crew, no trench. A new gym bag in the hallway that wasn't mine. For weeks before, her calls thinned to one-line texts. Busy. New project. I told myself she was building something. I didn't imagine she was taking something apart. Even now, I don't blame the ocean. It only ever kept the promises it made. Evan called on the SAT line after shift, voice flat the way medics talk when they have to cut a shirt off a wound. You sitting down? He asked, a courtesy more than a question. I braced my boots against the bunk frame, the rig's hum filling the pauses. He laid it out like a ledger you can't argue with. 14 months of siphons dressed up as errands. 2,000 here, 3 there. Then a rush in the last 90 days. Total, 214,000 moved beyond the horizon of our joint account. Not just the one screenshot. A $40,000 home equity line opened with my name bent into hers. The kind of forged signature that looks almost right if you want it to. 6 months ago, she changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance. Routine update, the note read. She made herself sole recipient, then texted someone saved as D about Plan B. He forwarded the cloud backups. Lena had set up a new phone with my old Apple ID and never changed the password. Every photo, message, note, pouring into my storage like a second tide. Jet Collins, 25, former trainer, current phantom. No W-2s in years. 3 prior relationships with women over 45, each ending around the 18-month mark, the way a lease runs out. In one case, the ex-husband died in what the papers called a tragic single-vehicle incident on a familiar road. No charges. Still, the pattern made a sound I recognized, the click before a ratchet pulls tight. I felt something inside me stop vibrating. Hurt cooled into geometry. Not rage, structure. The ocean teaches you that, too. You don't negotiate with pressure, you design for it. I opened the laptop I kept behind a locked locker panel and logged into the account only Evan and I knew. Winterlight Holdings, my grandmother's maiden name paired with the creek behind her farmhouse, glowed on the screen. 8 years of discipline lived there, 60 and 70% slices from overseas contracts, clean on taxes, lawfully structured offshore from the marriage by the corporation we'd built with a wary accountant's patience. Balance, $1.6 million. Enough to be a future. Enough to be leverage. Enough to not be afraid. I drafted one email to Grant Ellison in Houston. Subject, Operation Cold Return. We'd named it on a napkin once, half joke, half prayer, after a colleague left court with an empty wallet and a polite nod from a judge. My message was 5 lines, facts, attachments, what I'd need filed before wheels touched runway. I CC'd Evan, encrypted the chain, then closed the lid with the same care I use on a valve that could turn a night sour. I went to the mess and poured coffee, so black it felt medicinal. The men talked soccer scores, pay grades, the price of diesel back home. I listened to the rig breathe. Somewhere on shore, a plan drawn against me had just met a plan made for me. Pressure meets structure. Hold. Then move. Houston smelled like wet tarmac and coffee when the sliding doors whooshed me into the arrival hall. Evan stood by a pillar with a paper cup and a face that gave nothing away. He handed me a small envelope like we were trading baseball cards. Inside, a burner phone, 2 SIMs, a list of numbers handwritten in his blocky print, Grant's direct line, the bank investigator, a sheriff's deputy he trusted. Your regular sells a beehive, he said as we walked. She's been calling since yesterday. Voicemails in every register, sweet, scared, angry. He popped the trunk. A folder sat on top of a duffel. Bank froze the destination account. Pattern triggered an automatic hold. They want you in person. Evan's apartment became a war room in the time it takes to order takeout. Screens up, files fanned, my cloud storage mirrored on a monitor. The messages were all there, Lena and D, who we now knew as Jet. Their plans were banal and cruel at once. Rentals in Palm Springs, furniture talk, sun by the pool with your money, like it had changed names simply by being said out loud. The text about Plan B, insurance, sat in the middle of it like a nail in a road. Grant Ellison arrived without ceremony, tie already loosened. He read quickly, the way trial lawyers do when they're building a spine. "We move on 4 fronts," he said, uncapping a pen. Emergency motion to freeze all assets in her name and the LLC she fed. Criminal complaint on the Hellick forgery. Divorce filing citing fraud and conspiracy. And he tapped my badge logs on the table. Motion to dismiss the domestic violence claim with prejudice. Judges dislike manufactured fear, especially when it wastes a docket. He laid out the proof like clean instruments. My company's security badge pings from the rig for 7 straight weeks. Passport stamps showing exit and entry. Payroll records. The call history between Lena and me. No eruptions, no threats. "We also keep you officially at sea," he said. "No social posts. No neighbors. You're a ghost until service." I clicked on my regular phone just long enough to hear one voicemail. Lena's voice trembled with just the right amount of tremble. "Cole, please, there's been a misunderstanding with the bank. I moved funds to a safer investment like we talked about, but they need you to confirm. I'm scared. Call me." The performance would have worked on the man I was a month ago. I powered down and set it aside like a tool that no longer fit the job. We filed. E-signatures, timestamps, a courier with court shoes ready to run orders to a judge's chambers. Evan compiled exhibits, screenshots, bank trails, clipped metadata. Grant drafted language that felt like steel beams. "One more thing," he said at the door. "If we're lucky, she won't know you're on land until she's looking at a deputy." He held my eyes. "You good with that?" I thought of the rig at night, how you steady yourself with one hand and do the next necessary thing with the other. "I am," I said. Outside, the city glittered like a thing that didn't care who was heard under its lights. We cared enough for a strategy. The rest would be timing. Odessa looked different through a lens I'd paid for and forgot existed. The home cam stitched our rooms into silent dioramas. Kitchen, hall, patio, blue slice of pool. Each frame a memory with the sound turned off. On the screen, a young man sprawled in my deck chair, wearing my college sweatshirt like a borrowed history. He drank my whiskey without flinching, the bottle tilted easy, his feet up on the cedar table I'd planed smooth one winter on leave. Lena moved in and out of the frame, phone to her ear, pacing grooves into the patio stone. They looked domestic the way storms do on radar, all color and rotation until landfall. Evan set a fresh cup of coffee by my elbow. "You should see this," he said, spinning his laptop toward me. He'd been digging. Jet's name was a shallow root. Everything useful grew from public crumbs, court filings, real estate records, social media that still believed in privacy. 3 women in 5 years, all older, all solvent. Pattern tight as a knot. Romance, separation, fast cash, relocation, disappearance. In one file, an ex-husband's obituary sat beside a news brief. Longtime resident dies in a single-car crash on a familiar canyon road. No charges. No proof. Just the feeling of a hand leaving a shoulder 1 second before the wind changes. I watched Jet gesture with my glass. A ring of condensation ghosting the wood. Patterns aren't fate, but they are warnings. On rigs, we call it learning before the lesson hurts. My regular phone lit the room. Another voicemail from Lena arriving into a space I kept empty on purpose. I didn't play it. The messages were just scripts with my name swapped in. On the camera, she touched Jet's arm and he pulled away without looking. The kind of micro move that says the story is already slant. A ping from my neighbor, Mr. Whitaker, who'd spent 30 years babysitting wells, hit the burner. He'd texted photos. My grandfather's desk carried down the steps by men in matching shirts. The walnut drawers I'd cleaned with my own hands strapped shut with tape like a mouth. Then the china cabinet that had survived 2 wars and 3 moves, wrapped in a quilt with pink flowers. He added a caption only rig men would write. "Thought you'd want to know." Grant called before noon. "Property records just updated," he said. "Lena listed the house 2 days ago. 30% under market. Motivated seller. Your signature on the listing agreement." He didn't need to say the rest. "Forged. Quick sale. Disappear." I scanned the listing photos he forwarded. Angles designed to make rooms look larger, light flooding where it never had. Our life staged for a stranger's attention. A realtor's smile under the brokerage logo promised efficiency like mercy. I felt a small, precise anger, the kind that leaves everything on its feet and still moves the air. On screen, the sun slid across my patio's shadow line. Jet checked his watch. Lena checked the street. Somewhere, a moving truck turned the key and shifted into drive. Timing isn't everything, but in a collapse it chooses the moment when weight becomes fact. We were almost there. We drove west at dusk, the highway laid out like a ribbon you could pull tight. Houston's glare fell away behind us. Then the billboards, then the low towns with their one good diner and one broken light. Evan handled calls. Grant handled judges. I handled the silence. Somewhere around midnight the land flattened into memory, and that old Odessa sky opened like a lid lifted off a pot. Mr. Whitaker's porch light was the only star low enough to shake hands with. He met us at the door, no ceremony, just the look men trade when they know this is not about theater. "She has no idea you're in town," he said, voice kept soft so the night didn't crack. We set the gear, binoculars, thermos, a stack of papers, on his kitchen table and mapped the morning like a small op. The plan was a clock. Moving truck scheduled for 8:45. Sheriff's unit to arrive at 8:55, block the box, keep everyone honest. Court officer with an envelope at 9 sharp. Service first, speeches never. I would wait behind Mr. Whitaker's blinds until the knock. Then the walk across the street. Not to rage, to witness. I didn't sleep. I made coffee on the stove and watched the house through slats. Every room had a light I could name by color. The warm kitchen pendant I'd installed on a weekend. The cool hall sconces Lena chose from a catalog and never dusted. At 3, I took out the folder Evan had assembled and went page by page. Bank trails neat as train tracks. Phone logs with timestamps like heartbeats. Screenshots where words we never said in person were suddenly permanent. There is a comfort, a terrible one, in seeing the shape of harm. It gives your hands something to hold that isn't air. By dawn, a dusting of heat shimmered over the street. At 8:30, they came out. Jet in my sweatshirt again, put up against a sun he did not know. Lena with a tote full of small things that don't pack well, silver frames, a watch case, envelopes. She moved fast, head down. He moved like a man who has never been told no by a room that could enforce it. At 8:45, the truck arrived, diesel coughing, 3 men in matching shirts stepping down and scanning the job. They looked at the stack on the curb, the open door, the life about to be made portable. One of them admired the grain on my grandfather's desk the way carpenters do when they can't help themselves. Good wood, I heard through the glass. I felt that somewhere you can't point to on a chart. At 8:55, an unmarked car rolled in and locked the truck's exit with a quiet finality. 2 deputies climbed out, hands easy, eyes awake. The court officer followed in a suit the color of overcast. Papers tucked under her arm like a small sail. My pulse did not jump. It settled. The moment when pressure becomes measurement. I stood. Mr. Whitaker touched my elbow. "Steady," he said. We crossed the street together. 2 men who have waited out storms and learned how to open a door without making it worse. The deputies were already at the threshold. Lena answered with irritation rehearsed into welcome. Then she saw the badges. Then she saw me. But that is another breath. The last one here is the inhale. The held note before the strike. The exact second a plan touches air. The door opened on the smell of lemon cleaner and hurry. Lena's face arranged itself in real time. Annoyance, confusion, calculation. Each mask barely catching before the next slid over it. "Mrs. Bennett?" the deputy asked, voice even. He held the papers the way you'd hold something that should never hit the ground. "We're here to serve legal documents on you and the gentleman on premises." Jet appeared behind her, arm grazing her waist like a claim. Up close, he looked younger and more tired than the cameras let on. That sweatshirt, the one from my college, hung on him as if memory could be borrowed without weight. Lena's eyes found me over the deputy's shoulder. "Cole," she said, small, like a person testing a bridge. "You're supposed to be offshore," I finished. "I know." The court officer stepped forward, professional mercy in her expression. "Mrs. Bennett, Mr. Collins. This packet includes an emergency restraining order prohibiting transfer or disposal of marital property, a court-ordered freeze on accounts and associated LLCs, a criminal complaint for forgery related to the home equity line, nullification of the unauthorized listing of this residence, and notice of divorce proceedings brought by Mr. Bennett, citing fraud and conspiracy. Jet lifted his chin, one of those gestures that works on bouncers and friends who think trouble is charisma. She's afraid of him, he said, and tried to put bass in it. Judge Calloway dismissed the domestic violence claim this morning, I said, steady. 7 weeks of badge logs offshore, passport stamps, payroll, and our call records. It's hard to menace anyone from 6,000 miles away. The words didn't feel like triumph, just fact. On a rig, one wrong reading is death by confidence. In a courtroom, one false claim is a door that won't open again. Lena's tears started on cue. Clean tracks, just enough shine to read as sincerity. Cole, this is a misunderstanding. The money was for a safer investment? I said, like we talked about. I nodded toward the truck. And the furniture? The house at 30% under market? The text about Plan B if the bank didn't clear it. The last 2 words were a wire I didn't touch. Insurance. Accident. The kinds of ideas that stain. The court officer's tone softened without bending. You have 30 minutes to collect personal items, clothing, toiletries, medications. Electronics, jewelry, heirlooms, and furnishings remain pending inventory. You will sign the chain of custody log before departure. Deputies will accompany you. Jet started to speak again, then read the room. He looked at the deputy's hands, open but not unready, and closed his mouth. Lena's gaze darted past me to Mr. Whitaker on the sidewalk, then to the unmarked car pinning the truck, then back to my face as if there might still be an easy door. There wasn't. Inside, drawers slid, zippers ran, hangers knocked like distant rigging. The house sounded like a ship untying quietly from a dock. I waited in the shade. Mr. Whitaker stood beside me, both of us looking at a patch of lawn that needed edging. Good wood. That desk, he murmured. I nodded. We were speaking about a thing and also not. They emerged with bags that rustled like weather. Lena paused on the threshold. Cole, she tried again, voice smaller. I let the silence be the message. Some lessons require no lecture. They are taught by the presence of a consequence. I turned and walked toward the curb. When she called, Where are you going? I didn't stop. Home, I said, and felt how the word could mean a place I owned, and also a center I hadn't stood in for years. Behind me, pen scratched. Paper changed hands. Time moved the way a winch does, slow, strong, inevitable. 3 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom that smelled like paper and air conditioning, the kind of thin cold that makes everyone talk softer. The state flag hung in its corner like patience. Grant arranged our files into tidy stacks. Evan sat behind us, a silent metronome. Across the aisle, Lena wore a navy dress that tried to argue for her. The chair beside her was empty. Jet had disappeared 2 days after the serve, leaving with her last unfrozen cash and the jewelry he could pocket without rattling a drawer. Patterns finish themselves when you let them. Judge Calloway entered with the steadiness of someone who has seen most versions of most stories. She listened. She read. She did not flinch. Grant walked her through the ledger like a slow tide. Transfers stepping up over 14 months, a forged helic, beneficiary shifts. The LLC fed like a pet you plan to abandon. He slid the texts across. Lena to D. Jokes about spending my money while I worked at C. The black and white of Plan B when the bank wouldn't budge. The judge paused at those lines, removed her glasses, and fixed the room with the kind of look that takes noise out of people. Mrs. Bennett, she said, voice measured. Are you aware that conspiracy to commit insurance fraud is a felony? Lena's lawyer leaned in to whisper a different script in her ear. It wasn't like that, Lena said quickly, the tremble returning. Jet, he was joking, and I. Save causation for another forum, the judge said, not unkindly. This court dissolves marriages and apportions assets. The district attorney addresses crimes. She returned to the files, turned pages as if they might heat her hands. My badge logs lined up 7 clean weeks offshore. Passport stamps matched to payroll and call records. Bank freezes stamped with today's date. Property listing revoked by court order. My signature authenticated by an expert like a voice in a choir you can't fake. Lena's lawyer spoke about loneliness, about absence, about labor that doesn't fit on a W-2. The meals cooked, the house managed, the waiting. All true things that didn't reach the place where forged ink lives. Grant didn't fight the feeling in that speech. He held the facts up like a plumb line, and the wall leaned, or it didn't. The ruling came the way weather does. Inevitable once you've learned to read the sky. The court finds a sustained, premeditated effort by Mrs. Bennett to divert marital assets, coupled with document forgery and an intent to abscond, Judge Calloway said. Accordingly, all diverted funds are to be returned to Mr. Bennett. The residence remains his separate property. Spousal support is denied. The court refers evidence of forgery and potential conspiracy to the district attorney. Her gavel was a soft knock. It sounded like something closing that had been left open too long. In the hallway, Lena turned as if a different outcome might still be waiting in another room. "Cole," she said, my name emptied of its places. I kept walking because not every kindness is an answer. Sometimes mercy is the space you leave behind for a person to see themselves clear. Outside, heat hit like noon on steel. Grant clapped my shoulder once. A spare gesture, enough. We stepped into the sun, and the door side shut behind us. 6 months later, the mountains taught me a different kind of time. Days unspooled in wider loops. Sun easing across a meadow. Shadows of pines walking the hill like tall, patient animals. The cabin sat where the slope relented, 40 acres of timber and grass I'd bought 5 years back through Winterlight Holdings, a name that sounded like a promise when I signed it. Lena never knew it existed. The porch faced west. Evenings, the sky went lavender, then the first star arrived like a thought you'd been avoiding and finally let in. Boxes found me from Odessa. Mr. Whitaker had overseen the packing like a foreman with a fragile load. He slipped a note in the crate with my grandfather's desk. Goodwood still. I put that desk in the corner by the window and ran my fingers along the walnut lip where his coins used to rest. The heirlooms took their places without arguing. Picture frames with faces that remembered me, a watch that ticked steady once I wound it, the cedar chest that still smelled like its first tree. Everything else I donated or let go. Weight has to be carried by what you keep. Grant sent final paperwork dissolving Winterlight. Purpose achieved, taxes clean, doors closed with the sound of something finished. The Odessa house went to a young family who loved the kitchen and didn't know the ghosts. I signed that deed with a steady hand. Some places you honor by leaving. News drifted the way it does when you stop chasing it. Lena took a plea, probation, restitution she would never make whole. She moved in with her sister in Tulsa and took a retail job where the hours are long and the pay is honest. I don't celebrate that. Consequences are not a party. They're a ledger corrected. Jet reappeared in Arizona by way of photos that didn't know what they were admitting. A divorced doctor smiled beside him in desert light. Patterns walk until someone bars the door. Not everyone learns in time. My life got small on purpose. I fixed what could be fixed, a sagging porch step, a leak that taught me where the roof held its breath, the rattle in a pickup that yielded to a new belt and patience. I cooked simply, beans, trout I coaxed from the creek, bread that rose when I stopped rushing it. Mornings, I hiked the tree line and counted hawks. Afternoons, I read until the shadows reached my boots. Nights, the wind threaded the pines, and the cabin answered in soft clicks as it settled, with speaking to weather. When memory came, I let it sit without serving it tea. There was love in parts of that old life. There was neglect in parts of me. Offshore work trains you to trust structure more than promise. I thought money would cushion the absences. It doesn't. Only presence pays down presence. That's a lesson I'd rather not have learned this way, but I'm learning it still, slow, like good dough. Sometimes the phone rang. Evan with a joke. Grant with a form. Mr. Whitaker with a report on Odessa wind. I answered, then went back to the room the day had made for me. A man can build a life out of what remains if he quits pretending he needs what is already gone. Late September slid in with that quiet gold the mountains keep for people who wait. I spent the morning sanding a cedar board until it shone like something that remembered rain, then set it on sawhorses to become another shelf I didn't strictly need. After lunch, the phone rang, a number from Calgary. A project manager for a Canadian operator had found my name from an old superintendent who still believed in handshakes. Consulting, he said. 3 months, low travel. We need a grown-up in the room to keep the wells honest. He named a figure that would have thrilled the man I used to be. I told him I'd think, and meant it. After the call, the cabin felt larger in a kind way. I poured a bourbon and carried it to the porch swing I'd built in July, seat smooth where I'd worn it down with the back of my legs. The evening gathered in layers, pine pitch, cold air sliding down from the ridge, the creek whispering its same old sentence. I let the glass sit unsipped for a long minute, just to feel the trouble leaving my body without help. Peace, I've learned, is not passive. It's the job you work at when no one's paying. It's choosing food you cook for yourself, work you can finish in a day, a bed you earned. The offer hummed in my pocket like a small engine. I pictured rooms with fluorescent lights and maps pinned to cork, the old banter about rates and rigs, the way men lean over tables when a field misbehaves. I pictured, too, the drive home through snow, headlights cutting a tunnel, and this porch waiting as if held for me by an understanding friend. Offshore taught me that every system has a safe operating envelope. You don't run pressure just because the gauge says you can. You set your limits and live inside them. I wrote a list on a scrap of sandpaper. Money, time, pride, quiet. I underlined quiet. Then I added enough. I didn't say no to the job. I didn't say yes either. I set the list under a book on the table and watched the sky go violet, then cobalt, then dark with a single star above the last black ridge. Some decisions resolve themselves if you stop thrashing. Inside, I wound the old watch and heard it take the tick like an oath. I checked the latch on the door, more habit than fear. I washed the bourbon glass and left it to dry upside down, a small lid on a day that had asked for nothing I didn't have. When sleep came, it came honest. Not as escape, as harvest. Tomorrow, I might call Calgary back, or I might fix the hinge that complains when the wind shifts. Either way, the life is mine. Pressure meets structure. This time I hold.